Famine, an extreme scarcity of food. Around the world, the Great Hunger is referred to as the Irish Famine, but the Irish people refuse to call it a famine because it doesn't fit the definition. The Great Hunger was reported very differently throughout the world. This could be the reason for the discrepancy in the way people know the Great Hunger today. But to understand the Great Hunger, you need to know how the late blight got to Ireland and how it had such a profound effect on the nation. The instatement of the laws in Ireland for the suppression of poverty, penal laws, were enacted after the Battle of the Boyne. William of Orange won the battle and therefore became the King of England, thus prompting Protestant supremacy. The penal laws, among other things, restricted Catholics' right to vote, own a firearm, and own land. These laws led to the landlord-tenant relationship in Ireland. Thus, the British Protestant landlords owned all of the crops the Irish Catholic farmers grew. The landlords gave the potatoes to the farmers because they were inexpensive and high in nutrients. The fact that the Irish were only eating one food set them up for disaster. The blight was not created by a higher power as many people thought at the time. It came over the Atlantic Ocean on ships of guano from Peru. The British government made the farmers use this to fertilize their crops. The British also forced the Irish farmers to change from the lazy bed farming method. This method slowed the spread of diseases, but used more land for fewer crops. The new method left no buffer between crops, thus allowing the rapid spread of the blight. In 1845, the American newspapers saw that disaster was looming, thus prompting meetings throughout the U.S. regarding famine relief. Prime Minister of England, Sir Robert Peel, who lost some of the crops in Ireland in late 1845, set up disaster relief efforts and bought corn and other crops from the United States to make an attempt at averting disaster. Peel, a conservative, was replaced as Prime Minister by Lord John Russell, a Liberal. Russell made little to no efforts to help the Irish. With 15 million pounds of Irish food sitting in a Liverpool warehouse every day, and $33 million of Irish exports leaving the country, British newspapers were publishing articles titled Irish Repudiation and Remedy for Irish Pauperism. These articles explain why the Irish should be able to fend for themselves, and do not mention the fact that Ireland was exporting a lot of food to England. The articles also say that the Irish shouldn't be affected by this blight very much, simply because Belgians aren't affected as much. Moreover, remedy for Irish pauperism implies that the Irish have more than their crops to rely on, stating the amount of coastline. But in fact, Irish Catholics were not able to fish, because it was against the law. The rich Protestant landlords and their friends, however, were able to fish. And oftentimes, after a big day at sea, they paraded past the begging families, flaunting their fish. The article also states, Belgium not only feeds the whole of its own dense population, which alone is equal to Ireland, finding food for about 3 million people besides her own, but constantly exports corn besides. But unlike Belgium, Ireland didn't feed 3 million. It fed the 15 million in Wales and England. The British newspapers, mainly the London Times, criticized Queen Victoria for donating 2,000 British pounds to relief. She was the largest individual donor to famine relief. Similar to the British newspapers, the Irish newspapers reported this as a human-made disaster, not as something that was happening because of nature. But unlike the British newspapers, the Irish newspapers blamed the British government for the widespread distress. They reported the fact that over 22 million British pounds were leaving the country, in which millions of people were dying, dead, or fleeing their homeland. The Tuam Herald reported their interpretations of what some of the solutions the British newspapers had. Most notably, the London Times suggested that the blight was karma, and the cause was the repeal agitation, and ergo, The cure was the cessation of that agitation. The repeal the article is referring to is the repeal of the Act of the Union, which unionized Ireland and England. Many journalists said that God sent the blight, the British sent the famine. This sentiment still prevails today. This is why the Irish refer to this period as An Gorta Mór, or the Great Hunger. The Great Hunger caused the mass immigration of 1,500,000 Irish people to America. They were all forced onto ships that were packed to at least twice their capacity for the 2-month voyage. The ships, referred to as coffin ships, were also infested with the disease and sickness that many Irish people were trying to escape by going to North America. The ships moved west across the Atlantic Ocean until they got to New York, Boston, or Quebec. Many of the people that started the journey to America didn't finish it. Approximately 20% died on the voyage, and most of them were thrown over the edge of the boat into the ocean where they would lie forever. The main diseases that affected the Irish on the ships, equal to those on land, were typhus, typhoid, and relapsing fever. As opposed to hunger, these became the most common form of death. The living quarters on these ships were equal, if not worse, than those they were escaping from in their homeland. The lucky ones got a full 5 by 3 foot bed to sleep on. Another form of escape from the Great Hunger was going to jail. Many people decided that instead of paying the huge fee to go to the United States, they would rather go to prison. Even though they were Catholics and would get treated poorly, at least they would get food. When prisons got filled by the thousands attempting to escape, the British government decided to send convicts on ships off to the faraway, empty land of Australia. The Irish that did make it over and filled the housing developments in New York, Boston, and Quebec changed the course of North American history forever. With about 12% of all Americans claiming to have some Irish heritage, it is the second largest ethnic group behind German Americans. Furthermore, there have been 22 U.S. presidents to have some Irish heritage, from John F. Kennedy to Bill Clinton, and most recently, Barack Obama. 14% of all Canadians claim to have Irish heritage, making it the fourth largest ethnic group. The effects on the nation of Ireland were much greater. There were many attempted uprisings prior to and during the Great Hunger. All were unsuccessful. However, after the Great Hunger, there was a successful uprising and eventually led to 26 of the 32 counties in Ireland to becoming free. The Irish people read in their newspapers that the British government were taking the food that the Irish farmers were growing. This worsened the public image of the British government. Prior to this, the Irish people had been told that the British government were operating in Ireland under the best interest of the Irish people, and many believed it. The Irish uprisings prior to the hunger were fought because they wanted to be a free, separate nation, not because they thought the British rule would really be damaging to the nation itself. These risings were fought with less emotion and were quelled. The 1848 Young Ireland Rising was fought with only emotion, because all of those involved were starving. This was quickly quelled. In 1916, after 64 years of what seemed to be a PTSD epidemic that struck the whole nation, thousands of young men and women enacted the rising that would emancipate 26 counties of Ireland. By the end of the famine, the population went down by 8 million. The population of Ireland has never recovered and is still below the 1841 census. Even though the blight was throughout Europe, Ireland was the only country to experience a decline in population. Genocide, the systematic and deliberate extermination of a population.